Great, so hopefully everyone can hear me. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Agnes Hamilton. I'm co-director of Pelican Arts Rev. Thank you for joining us this evening on this first night of lockdown to talk about instrumental exams. Very exciting. I'm going to do a sort of presentation. The way it's going to run, I'm going to do a sort of presentation covering a few of the topics that we set out. I'm going to hand over to the lovely Alice, who's one of our teachers and also an ABRSM examiner, who's going to talk about a few things, and then we're going to answer any questions at the end. You can use the chat feature in this, and if you just, Fiona in the corner is going to be monitoring the chat feature, and if you put a Q and then your question, she'll sort of amalgamate them at the end and put any that are similar together so that we can answer as many as we possibly can. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. So, so what are music exams? There are two main examining bodies in the UK, ABRSM and Trinity Guildhall. These represent the two major musical educational institutions in the country: the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, which is Royal Academy, Royal College, and the Trinity School of Music and Guildhall School of Music. So those are the two main different examining bodies. We are one of the only countries in the world, there are a few others, but we're one of the only countries in the world that has such a structured examining system for music education. Most countries don't do this, don't really recognize this, but we have a very embedded, structured examining music system, which is worth kind of knowing about, which is why we're talking about it. Sorry, I realized I meant to be doing this. The standard range for exams is between grade 1 and 8. That's the standard range. There are other exams. So there's pre-grade 1 prep and there's post-grade 8 diploma, but the main range that you will engage with is between grade 1 and 8. Exams are designed to be leveling tools throughout a musical education as opposed to the only course of learning. It's important to understand that there's a lot of stuff to learn outside of exam syllabuses, and doing that is really going to help students achieve good marks in exams and so on. So what is the difference between examination boards? So there are similarities, lots of similarities between them, and a few main differences between the two exam boards. ABRSM, the main thing with ABRSM is that examiners, which Alice will tell you a bit more, are general as opposed to specialists. So that means that they will examine all instruments. They won't just have a specialism themselves. They have to be keyboard trained so that they can do the supporting tests, but they are general examiners. So that means you can get lots of different instruments on the same day. It means you're going to get a wider range of available options in terms of examining centres because only one examiner is required. Here we go. With Trinity Guildhall, as I say, the main difference is that the examiners are instrument specific. So if you're taking a violin exam, you're going to have a violinist as your examiner. That therefore means that there are fewer options in terms of examining days, because they book an examiner, a violin examiner, and all violin students go to that day. So you're likely to, it will be in your location, but you're likely to have slightly less choice in exactly what day you have and where you're going, because it's specific to the examiner. However, the plus sides are you get a violinist to examine you. Equally, some of the supporting tests are different. What we mean, we'll bed into that a bit. What we mean by supporting tests are oral and sight reading and things like that. Some of them are slightly different. You have a little bit more choice. However, they generally follow the same structure. They're covering the same topics and things like that. Most of our teachers at Pelican Arts Rev tend towards ABRSM exams, which is why we're going to focus mainly on these. This is for a number of reasons. Mostly it's due to repertoire, mostly it's due to the pieces that are on the syllabus. However, you will find that the exceptions to the rule might be drum and guitar teachers who may use Trinity Guildhall. Most of our guitar teachers still use ABRSM, but some will use Trinity Guildhall, and your teachers will talk more specifically about that with you. So when does my child start taking exams? Well, the most important thing to understand about this part is that grade 1 is not a beginner's exam. That's the most common misconception that we get across the board, is grade 1 is the entry-level exam, whereas actually grade 1 usually comes after at least a year, if not a couple of years, especially if it's to do with piano, especially if it's a piano exam. It takes a bit of time to get to grade 1. You have to get through those beginner steps. You have to be confident playing pieces, doing a few more advanced techniques. So yeah, it's not the first thing you can do after a couple of weeks of lessons. The first exam that your child will take or could take is likely to be a prep test. And we do encourage teachers to use prep tests, especially for younger children. These come in the form of, they're very similar to an exam, so they have to play a couple of pieces, they have some supporting tests, but they can't fail this exam. So it's based on a report. The examiner will write a report. They'll structure it like an exam, so the child gets the experience of being in an exam, but they will get a report immediately telling them, you know, how they did. They'll be very encouraging. So it's a really great way to introduce, especially very young children, into what an exam looks like. So we really encourage those as a pre-grade 1 step. Getting the right time to take an exam is really crucial for a child's kind of engagement and enjoyment of taking exams and understanding what that is, which is why it's really important to be really ready, especially for grade 1. I would say grade 1 is one of the most important exams that your child will take across the board, because it is their first one. And that's why we want them to be absolutely more than ready to take that exam, so they have just a positive experience. So it's really important that when you're thinking about taking grade 1, you do it talking with your teacher, making sure they're absolutely ready, being 100% ready before they're even entered, so that it's just a really positive experience across the board. So that, yeah, bringing me on to talking to your teacher. Obviously, it goes without saying, your teacher has the weekly contact and really knows the level that they're playing at. I really encourage you to talk to your teachers if you'd like to understand the path towards your child's first exam or any exam. Arrange to have a chat with your teacher, and they will easily talk you through what the stages are that are left to get to that exam point, which levels they have to get to, whether they're close, whether there are a few more things to do. It will really help you engage with that next process. So what does an exam entail? I'm going to hand over to Alice in a bit to kind of expand on this, but very briefly, from our position, from the general outline, there are 3 pieces that have to be played from list A, list B, and list C. Now, list A, B, and C follow different genres of music. So you have early music, Baroque, classical in list A. In list B, you have more romantic repertoire, and in list C, you have more jazzy, contemporary repertoire. So this is designed to test children in all different styles, all different musicality. So 3 pieces that they have to play. Then there are scales and arpeggios, and as you get more advanced, more complex scales and arpeggios, but everybody has to do scales and arpeggios. They get asked a selection, not every single one that's on there, but they don't know which ones they're going to get. Sight reading, which is a short, it gets longer the more advanced the exam is, but a short phrase that they get to look at for 30 seconds to a minute, and then they have to play and they get marked on. and then oral tests, which are ear tests. So the examiner will have a series of about 4 tests. They're going to play them through and they answer questions on them. So I'm going to hand over to Alice now, who's our amazing academic and piano teacher, but also a ABRSM examiner.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. So I have been an examiner with ABRSM for about 1.5 years, and I just thought it would be helpful for me to give you an overview from my perspective as an examiner, including a quick outline of how the exam runs from my perspective, and our approach to the marking criteria. So as Agnes has mentioned, we are all generalist examiners. What that means is that we're not looking for specific technique or aptitude in an instrument per se. So violinist, I won't be looking for finger technique and bowing. What we're assessing is the overall musicality within the performance. And that applies to every section of the exam. So in the pieces, we're looking for a fully rounded performance, which includes precision in notes, in rhythm, sense of consistent sound, some realization of musical shape. I'm quoting from a mark scheme here, and then overall a positive sense of performance. We always mark from the pass mark, so that is a starting point. As soon as we hear the first note, we're looking at the pass criteria, and then hopefully, and in the majority of cases, adding marks as the performance goes to reflect the areas which show strength and musicality overall. So from the moment that a candidate enters the room, my job as an examiner is to put them at ease. We're not in this to intimidate or to create a negative experience at all. It is about encouraging musicality, and as often as possible, I will give a welcoming smile, settle the child at the piano, or make sure that they've got a moment to get comfortable at a music stand, depending on the instrument. I often think that first encounter can really set the tone for the exam, and that is something that all examiners are encouraged to do, just to make that as welcoming as possible. I would just repeat Agnes's point that the prep test itself cannot be failed. That doesn't mean you should be underprepared in any way, but it is intended to be a positive introduction to that experience in the exam room, where it's one-to-one with an examiner. And quite honestly, that can be fairly intimidating for a young child who might never have done that before, doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. So the prep test is a really great introduction to how those exams work, and the feedback is in the form of a handwritten certificate, which is passed to the student at the end of the exam. Although, as current things stand, it'll just be placed neatly on a table for them to pick up on the way out. I'll cover that in a minute. So the outline of the exam as a whole tends to include these 4 elements that Agnes has touched on, and we're marking from a pass, merit, distinction criteria. If for any reason it goes below pass, then there are also criteria for that, but on this, the basis today, I'm going to work on the fact that everybody will be prepared for all elements of the test. I've got a selection of various syllabuses with me here. Each of these contains the marking criteria at the back, and it is also available online on the ABRSM website. So there's nothing hidden. Everything that we're looking for is listed there. So for a pass, generally, we're looking for generally correct notes. So whatever the melody may be, it needs to be recognisable without glaring errors. We need the performance to flow. So if there are regular hesitations or retakes or pauses because of errors, that is going to pull the mark down significantly. And I'd say, honestly, for a pass, those 2 elements are really, really key. If there's anything there that's interrupting the flow, we're not going to be able to award any greater than a pass, because actually at that stage, the candidate, for whatever reason, is struggling to convey a musical performance. Beyond that, the marking criteria also looks at tone, shape, and performance as a whole. So working on the basis that the notes are actually largely accurate and that there is a good sense of rhythm in place, then we can start to think about how well controlled the sound might be. And this can vary from instrument to instrument. So on a piano, you have the sound, you press the keys, that is your melody. But is that controlled? Is there any awareness of different colours within the sound? Similarly, with a wind instrument or brass, is the candidate able to control kind of longer or more sustained moments? Are they able to add anything to that performance? So we're looking for consistency there, maybe some realisation of musical shapes, that's your louds and your softs, and as it says in the mark scheme, a positive performance. So something that we can all take from it, and something that I actually will really enjoy listening to, and as much as the candidate enjoys performing. I think it's then a given that if all these elements are in place, then we can start looking at the distinction marks. So each piece is marked out of 30, and for a distinction, the band is 27 to 30. The criteria for this band details highly accurate notes, rhythmic character well conveyed, well projected, expressive musical shaping, and a vivid communication of style. And honestly, if all the elements that I mentioned at the beginning for the pass criteria are in place, then there's no reason why the candidate cannot lift a performance and offer that range of colour. It's not something that can be achieved overnight. I think, as you're probably well aware, practicing is a daily event, and once you've built up the basis of the piece and the structure, that's when you can begin to add that colour. And also it needs to be taken into account the fact that this is a performance. So practicing and preparing your exam as such, even if it's just a run through for a family member or run through for your teacher, I cannot emphasize enough how helpful that is, because again, just when you're in the exam room, generally it's true, children manage the situation much better than adults, but nonetheless, as much preparation as you can, both mentally as well as the kind of physical for whatever you're going to play, that will just lend itself to a more positive result, I think, and a more positive experience on the day. So yes, Agnes, did you want me to touch on anything else? I've got
some of the supporting tests, maybe.
Yeah, so the supporting tests, in addition to the pieces, are a really key part of the exam. And as an examiner, also as a teacher, actually, I see how often and easily they can be overlooked. So word of warning to you now would be, when a teacher is asking you to work through perhaps a sight reading book, or to make sure that you're familiar with your scales, then do. Because dull as it may be, and it may seem quite repetitive, each of those, so there's a section of the exam for scales and arpeggios, it's marked out of 21. And then for the sight reading, it is also marked out of 21. Those are extremely easy marks, especially the scales and arpeggios, okay? You just need to deliver the patterns. And sometimes I ask for things and what I hear is nothing like what I asked for, and I cannot really blame, I don't know, there's no blame as such, but the child doesn't know what they're doing. Presumably the teacher has given some inclination. There's nothing I can do on the day. If I ask for an A major and they start on a D, then we're not getting much further. So just taking care of those. For a pass for scales and arpeggios, you're looking at generally correct notes and continuity generally maintained. That's very doable, and that's a 14 out of 21 straight away. If the notes are largely accurate and they're flowing with a secure response, so ask for D major and promptly there's a D, you've got a merit. That's 18 marks out of 21. And then for the distinction, they're highly accurate and they're confident. That's the criteria. So I think don't throw those marks away. Don't take them lightly. The sight reading can be very eventful. Just so you know, if you just play one note at all, it's worth 7 marks. Okay, so this is also marked out of 21. There are very few candidates that don't attempt it at all, but sometimes the attempt is absolutely unrecognisable. And actually, this is something, again, which can be prepared and can be delivered confidently. It doesn't need to be entirely precise. It's sight reading. Things might happen, but being able to look at that music and identify a sense of pulse, a sense of melodic shape, that is already going to bring you into the pass bracket. Okay, so the mark criteria asks for note values that are mostly realised, pitch outlines in place despite errors, and allows that a cautious response might be there. But that's 14 marks already out of 21. Any basis on that, so a mainly correct rhythm, largely correct notes, you're looking at a merit. So again, these tests, they can be factored into practice in a lot of different ways. Agnes might touch on this, but if, for example, it means picking out melodies on the piano and then writing out the notes after, you can reverse the elements of sight reading. It's just being able to follow those patterns, make it into something that resembles what the examiner has given you to play. Then last but not least, the oral tests, which depends on your perspective. I always used to love doing these, but it can depend on preparation. These are basically ear tests. So you might clap the beat in accompaniment with the examiner. So I would play a piece of music and you find the beat. You might sing back some echoes. That is not a singing test. That is just a test to establish an awareness of pulse and also beat, because I will play an echo and then we ask you to sing it or echo it back. And the examiner prompts that and directs it. It's not, you're not thrown in at the deep end. Then there's often a test towards the close, which involves some listening and answering questions. So observing kind of louds and softs, bouncies, smooth playing. These are tests that can be prepared and shouldn't be something that throws you. So there's an oral trainer app available on the ABRSM. Even just listening to the radio, it doesn't matter what you're listening to, just kind of being aware of what you're hearing. Those are what those tests are about. And again, to pass that section, this is out of 18 marks, but for a pass, the criteria simply lists that strengths outweigh weaknesses and that there may be a cautious response. So that would be reflected by an attempt to answer each question and general accuracy, but it doesn't need to be accurate throughout to obtain even a pass in that section. But I have had candidates who just refuse to sing or just don't know. And you know, my job is to try and encourage them and to enable a pass. So I'll find different ways. If they don't want to sing, maybe they'd want to hum it. If they're not willing to do that, maybe they'd like to clap it. At that point, we're really scraping the barrel. But just to reassure you, the examiner is on your side. We don't want to fail candidates. That is not, it's not a nice feeling. It's certainly not nice for the candidate, and it's not what we're about. But there are also ways in which your preparation can really be reflected in the exam result there. So I'd really encourage that.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we'll press on, and then any questions then between Alice and I, we can answer them at the end. Okay, so a little bit more. How important are exams? I think this is something that comes up a lot. I get asked it a lot as a teacher as well as a director, and teachers hear it all the time. They are, of course, a really, really great way to reward progress. It's something that is kind of understood socially as well, but it's really important to understand that it's not the be-all and end-all of instrumental playing. In fact, all scholarships, auditions, any applications involving music will be based solely on how you play, not what exam certificate you have, what mark you have, anything like that, what latest grade you have achieved. They really don't care. It is always about how you play, how you perform, and they're going to listen to you. Equally, although some applications actually state you need to be a grade 5 standard to get this, to apply for this scholarship, they don't mean that you need to hold the actual exam certificate. You just need to be playing at that standard and be able to demonstrate the level that they are looking for. They're merely using it as a bar for what you have. Later in life, exams can be really important for university applications. This might seem crazy for me to be talking to you guys, because most of you are going to have primary school age children. However, let's think about the future slightly. the grade 7 to 8, or grade 5 to 8 exam range are worth UCAS points. So grade 8 is equivalent of an A level, of an extra A level, and these things come really in handy. That is often what makes a candidate stand out when they're applying for university. So everyone will have 3 A stars, or however they're now marking them, I'm not entirely sure. But not everyone will have 3 A stars and a grade 8 trumpet. And so those things are actually really, really useful. They are extra points, as it were, to show that you're a developed, rounded student. So yeah, they can be really useful there. You do not need them to become a professional musician. It's really not important. You don't need them to go to music college or anything like that. To give you a very good example close to home, I'm a violinist. I went to junior college when I studied at Royal College of Music. I went to junior college when I was 9. The entry level is around a grade 8. I have only ever taken grade 1 violin. I've never taken another exam on the violin, and I am a fully professional violinist that has achieved at that level. So it's really not the be all and end all. However, it is used as a technique for rewarding progress, and I think there's really good merit in that. Ask about the way that your teacher likes to teach. I think that's a really important thing to remember. Don't assume that they're going to do all the exams, although they probably are keyed into exams. You know, for instance, as a teacher myself, lots of my students have gone through them. However, we tend to do grade 1, maybe grade 3, grade 5, grade 7, because I find that doing all of them slows down their progress. They can go through quicker, and that's the way I tend to teach, because I didn't take exams myself. Equally, if you have a teacher that comes from mainland Europe, they're really unlikely to engage in exams in the same way as we do. They're going to be aware of them, but they never ever had to take exams to achieve as a musician. So it's really important to kind of talk about what you want from exams. You know, what do you want all of them? Do you want to be guided by the teacher? All those types of things. So this brings me on to music theory, which might be an alien word to some of you, but what is music theory and why is it important? Well, music theory is not talked about enough when we talk about music education or learning an instrument. For instance, in Europe, it's synonymous with learning an instrument. If you start an instrument, you are doing oral training and music theory at the same time, all the way through. It's part of it, but we don't do that here. It's not mandatory. However, what is mandatory is that if you get to a grade 5 level and you're going to take anything above grade 5, you cannot enter that exam without a grade 5 music theory certificate. So you have to produce that certificate. It has to be on file, and you have to have passed for you to take grade 6 to 8. And so what that often means is children get to grade 5 and then they go, right, you better pass grade 5 theory. And the trouble with that is if that has not been addressed up to that, it takes time to get to that level. Grade 5 music theory is designed to be the same level as grade 5 instrumental, and it's taken time to get to that point. So you're not going to just be able to magic it out of thin air to do it. So we really, really recommend that you do it alongside, that you're studying. Sorry, yeah, so that you're studying alongside when you're starting. So there's a load of really great books like Theory for Beginners or things like that that you can start with, that you can incorporate with your instrumental teacher. They can set their homework and do it all the way through. They can probably do grade 1, 2, maybe even grade 3, just through books and with the small guidance of the teacher. And then when you get to grade 4 and 5, it's really useful to have a proper lesson just to get you through those grades, to really understand the slightly more complex things going on there. But equally, it's really important on another level. I want to always remind you all the way through here that exams are not the be all and end all, and that actually doing music theory really opens up instrumental learning. By music theory is about really learning how to interpret music. So it's what it's made up of, how you read it. And getting up to a grade 5 level gives you the skills to read not just your own music, but maybe music of another instrument, to be able to develop how you might write something that's in your head. If they're playing and they want to write it down, music theory is going to enable them to do that, enable them to share it. And it's just a really, really great way to develop their musical knowledge. It also, again, tying into more mainstream education, it's a requisite for GCSE music. It's a really great basis if they want to take anything like that. They having that level is going to be really, really important. So how often should my child be taking exams? Well, really, that's how long is a piece of string. It really depends. It depends on the child, it depends on the instrument, it depends on the grade. I wish there was a really easy answer to tell you, but there really isn't. I think the instrument really changes it a lot, because although they are all within the same grade range, as it were, some instrument, it can be more difficult between grades for some instruments, and some it's more seamless. So that is a big thing. And then sometimes you will really get a jump in standard between grades that takes more time. So it's really important that you don't put they must do a grade every single year in your mind, because sometimes that won't be possible, or sometimes it'll actually be more helpful to jump a grade so that they can progress more quickly, but it's going to take a bit of a longer time to do that. Equally, after the first exam, it really depends on how the child reacted to the exam, reacted to prep. Was it positive? All of those things, that's really going to influence what the speed in which you take exams. We really recommend taking breaks between preparing for exams. I see a lot of people take their grade 1 and then literally the next day turn up with the grade 2 book and go, I'm doing my grade 2 now. And that can really result in kind of losing the reason why they started the instrument in the first place. So not really discovering any music or anything outside of that, developing the techniques, taking the time. And as you get further down the grade system, it becomes harder and harder to do that, because you haven't developed the techniques to get to that next standard. And so when you're getting to grade 3, grade 4, suddenly doing that jump straight after that exam becomes really difficult, and it becomes much more of a slog. It becomes harder, and children tend to get a lot more frustrated because they can't make that jump as quickly. So we really recommend just taking a breather once you've taken that exam, playing some pieces, doing some studies, doing some technique, really just expanding a little bit between them, and then taking that next exam is going to be so much easier because they're going to be more than ready. It's going to be a really seamless preparation. So be strategic. I would really recommend thinking about what you want to achieve, what with your teacher can, if your child starts in year 2 and you're saying, okay, by the time they leave in year 6, I want them to have a grade 4 or 5, or you want them to be around that standard, which by the way is completely possible. It's not, you don't have to be exceptionally talented to get to that. I think it's really important to say that. Be strategic. Don't go, they need to take an exam every single year. Talk to your teacher, go, okay, so, you know, they started in year 2, maybe by the end of year 3, they can take their grade 1, be confident in that. And then maybe halfway through year 5, we can get to a grade 3. And then by the end of year 6, you're at a grade 4 or 5, rather than barreling through each exam. You're giving yourself more time to explore, to feel comfortable, but actually achieve that goal really really easily. And I think it's important to say that achieving grade 4 to 5 by year 6 is well above national average, but it is something that is completely attainable. I've done it many times. Lots of our teachers have done it many times. It really just depends on being strategic, how you're teaching, how you're practicing, and then you're going to get it, and any child can do it. It's not about talent. So how do I help prep my child for exams? A few of you are maybe in the countdown to exams this session and wondering how best to support them. A little bit of practice every day. I know we say it a lot as teachers, but it's really, really important. Creating a routine, so having it at the same time, and then having a routine of what you do in that practice. So maybe you start with a few of your scales, and then you go into your piece, and then you do a bit of sight reading, and then you do a couple of oars, and then you finish, and then you get used to that. Obviously, next month's webinar is all on practice, and we will bed way more into that then. But specifically for exams here, every day, really helpful. I would say in the real run-up, a piece a day is really important. Rather than trying to cram everything in, choose one of your pieces, really work on that piece. Next day, don't even do that piece, do the next piece. Next day, do the other piece. Don't get bedded into, I really want to do this piece because I love it and I'm really good at it. Make sure that you're doing one piece each day, no favorites. Scales and arpeggios in a bowl. This is a technique as old as time. We put everything, it's the same with spelling and all those things, and this is no different. Get a bowl, put all the scales and arpeggios in it, and pick out 2 or 3 per practice and make them do it. And then the next one, pick 2 or 3, make them do it next. When they're all done, put them all back, start again. It will just, again, mean that the ones that are not so easy don't get forgotten because they're difficult. Making sure that you're doing all of those is really important. Add sight reading into the routine is really useful. Obviously, Alice touched on it. Improve Your Sight Reading by Paul Harris, which we'll put at the end. Really, really great resource. It's been going since I was a kid. It's a really, really great book that really talks it through. There's loads of exercises and really builds up how to approach sight reading in a really approachable way. Look at your teacher's notes. I know this sounds, obvious, but you'd be surprised how many of my teachers go, every week they come back and they haven't fixed the same thing. And generally that is because what happens is you're going to play through and you're maybe going to look at it, but the most important thing you could do right now in prepping for an exam is to read exactly what your teacher says, zero in on that bit that they say isn't as good, or watch the fingering here, just practice that bit, don't play it through, and then play it through once you fix those bits. So if you really focus now on just fixing those really specific bits, it's going to really pay off in the end. And again, as Alice said, doing some mock exams. We're doing mock exams as standard this year. Every child will have a mock exam in their lesson, which if you've signed up for it to be marked by me, will be marked by me. Otherwise, it will just be recorded and we will see it and see where everyone is, so that they have to play from start to beginning in an exam setting, but do it at home as well, because playing it through is the biggest test of all without being able to stop. That's always where the errors come up. I'm going to whiz through this because I'm conscious we need to take some questions, and also Alice obviously talked about it. Yes, most children hate scales and sight reading. It is important. It's really, really, really important. And the thing that I always say is, forget, pass, merit, distinction. If you don't do, you could be a distinction player and get 27, 28 for all your pieces, and if you flunk those supporting tests, you're only ever going to get pass. If not even, you might not even pass the exam, and that's such a shame. And one of the biggest things that upsets me when I go look over scores is when I see the children that were playing at that top level and should have come out with a distinction across the board, and they're at a pass and a merit because all of their supporting tests are pass, sometimes fail, and because clearly they really love their pieces, they're really excited, they're really playing, they don't want to do anything to do with their scales, and then they're not rewarded for this great musician that they are because of those tests. So it's just so important to pay that attention. But equally, on a teacher level, it actually really makes learning an instrument easier. The best way to think about it is think of warming up for exercise. You have to do it. It's not interesting, but it is necessary. And honestly, the greatest joy of my life as a teacher was when my student, who is now grade 8, turned around and went, "Oh, I understand why scales are important." Was just like absolutely brilliant, because he approached a piece and suddenly it had a massive scale run and he could sight read it, and that was really easy and he got it. But we're not doing it to torture children. We're doing it because it really helps. Okay, so useful resources, just a little, and again, we will put the slides up on the website and you can have a look at them. ABRSM has really invested in a lot of apps now. There weren't these 10 years ago, there really are now. There's Oral Trainer, which obviously helps with the ear. There's a thing called Speed Shifter, which helps them play their pieces at different speeds and challenges them on that. Practice Partners, all about like them playing with the accompaniment or measuring that so they get used to playing as an ensemble. There's a piano sight reading trainer, which will help them with training. Outside of that, there's a thing called Scale Helper, which I use a lot. It's unfortunately not for piano, but for other instruments, it will give them a mark on how well they perform their scales. They can play their scales, it will challenge them, and it will literally tell them, was it in tune? Was it in time? Was it performed fluently? And it will give them that mark. And that's, children really, really react well to technology, obviously, these days. And actually, I find suddenly some of my students are really loving doing scales because they get an immediate reward from getting a mark. Equally, books, the Improve Your Sight Reading, Improve Your Oral by Paul Harris, can't recommend them enough. They are fantastic. And a start-off theory book is My First Theory Book by Lena. We use a lot. I use it all the time. It builds up. And then it goes to grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. It's really child friendly, really great start to these things. So that's basically it from us. There's lots of really great ways to measure progress, which we're going to talk about in future sessions, future webinars, performance, outside opportunities. They all really help reward progress. Obviously, exams are a really important part of that as well. And we hope that you've managed to get some good strategies from that. So Fiona, shall we answer some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we will share the slides afterwards. That's not a problem to people asking about that. Tassie's asked a couple of good questions about the jazz exams.
Yeah.
First being, are the examiners jazz specialists? And the second part of that is, it looks as though you don't need to have passed grade 5 theory to do the higher level jazz exams. So, Alice?
Yeah, I'm going to pass it to Alice on that.
Yes, okay, let me just clarify, I am not a jazz examiner. I'll do my best on this. So jazz examiners receive same training as practical grade classical examiners, such as myself, plus additional specialist training to become a jazz examiner. There have in the past been specialist jazz examiners who only examine jazz exams, but now because it tends to increase an examiner's availability, they tend to examine across both syllabuses. So often if an examiner is at a venue for 2 or 3 days, they'll examine both jazz and classical. So they're not specifically for one or the other. You know, if I were to take that specialist training, I could become a jazz examiner in addition, but they will have received specialist training so that they are able to administer those jazz exams. And then your other question, in terms of taking a grade 5 theory, so why don't you need grade 5 theory to continue onto a grade 6 instrument if you have a jazz grade? The ABRSM use, I don't know about Trinity, but the ABRSM use grade 5 theory as a benchmark in order to progress to grade 6, 7 and 8. So they also offer practical musicianship or the jazz grade, grade 5, as an alternative to that. That just depends on the individual. So if you have done jazz exams and you've done a jazz grade 5, then that's brilliant and you can carry on to grade 6, 7 or 8 on your classical instrument. If you haven't, it probably makes more sense to look at doing the music theory, which you will hopefully have built up alongside your practicing on a day-to-day basis. And the books that Agnes has recommended are brilliant. Paul Harris is an ABRSM examiner himself, so you know, comes from the horse's mouth.
I think with the jazz exams, it's really important to, if your child is really interested in jazz, obviously, we know Tassie, that Ned is a really great jazz clarinetist, but jazz exams are a kind of different level to classical exams. So taking grade 1 jazz piano, for instance, you're going to need to be a higher level than a grade 1 classical standard to take it, because it involves slightly more sophisticated techniques. So it's something that you kind of come to after a bit of a basis of learning to be able to develop on afterwards.
Brilliant. Okay, so next, Agnes, and I think this is the actual $100 million question, and that is, do we know how exams are going to be affected by COVID?
The million-dollar question.
The answer is we don't.
Well, the ABRSM, I'll let Alice say what she's been told as well, but the ABRSM has said they are going forward with exams, so we're hopeful that we're not going to have to cancel these exams again. I believe it's down to the venue's choice and how they feel safe. However, our exams, I believe, are all at the ABRSM headquarters, which therefore should be safe. The precautions, Alice, I will hand over to you.
Yeah. So exams being able to go ahead are dependent on the venue being happy to host. Yes, so if you're at headquarters, chances are that will happen. I can't guarantee, because I've had an email from the chief examiner today to say that they will let us know individually as to whether our work is going to go ahead in the next few weeks. In terms of precautions, so in terms of pianos and keyboards, there will be 2 keyboards in the exam. There'll be a piano for the candidate to play on and a keyboard which only the examiner will use. In terms of providing sight reading or any handouts for the oral tests, these will be placed on a separate music stand, so the examiner will not be touching them, the candidate will not be touching them, and there will be a plastic screen or plastic covering to cover those, so which can be sanitized between exams. There'll be social distancing in place, so there'll be markers on the floor so that the candidate knows exactly where to stand, and that will also be guided by music stands which will be placed as and where they need to be before the start of each exam. PPE will be used, that's up to the examiner's discretion, also dependent on any particular requests from the venue, bearing in mind that it reduces communication to a degree, and in fact just maybe more reassuring for the candidate if they can see the examiner's face. There will be a minimum distance of 2 meters between the candidate and examiner at all times. That's why some venues obviously won't be able to run the exams if they don't have the facility to provide these additional requirements.
Can I just pick up on one thing from Alex, which is about entering exams? Basically, they run termly. We enter the kids as they're ready for the term that they will do their exam in, depending on the advice from the teachers. Pelican facilitate all of that. We're doing it a bit differently this term in the sense that we're not running our own exam centre. So often we run an exam centre at St Stephen's and the examiner comes to us for like a bulk number of days. But that's clearly not possible at the moment. So this time round, we're going to ABRSM, or our students are going to ABRSM. So, but basically they run on a termly, they're like school, they run on a termly basis.
There's a very strict deadline, often at the start of the term, that is available. There, you can't enter them afterwards. Sometimes there's late submission, but it's not guaranteed that you'll get anything or that you'll get a place. So there is a very strict deadline for it. And the thing that is really important that everybody is aware of with this, and that's why we really try to counsel you to really work with your teacher on this, is that you can't just pull out of an exam. I mean, you can just not turn up, but you will still be, it's not refundable. Once you have entered your child into exams, it's not refundable. It's not up to us. We have nothing to do. We just pay for it. It won't be refunded except for very, very special circumstances. And I've never really had them except for when they had to cancel them for COVID. So just kind of doing it on a punt and saying, I think they'll be ready, and then removing them, you won't get your money back on that, sadly.
Okay, I think that's everything. I think we've mopped up everything from the questions. Oh, apart from somebody who hasn't had their date yet. Vimy, can we pick that up with you tomorrow?
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
And how much are the exams? They vary. I can't remember what the prep test level is.
Prep test is almost at £40 now. They're not cheap exams, and they get more expensive per grade. Yeah, and also it's really important to remember that when you're entering an exam, don't just think of the cost of the exam. If you are anything but a pianist, you are likely going to have an accompanist, and that is going to cost as well because of the time to rehearse with the accompanist and to therefore have them in the exam. That's not something that is provided by ABRSM. So you have to pay for an accompanist, and then there are books and things like that as well. So again, that's why I often really counsel to think strategically about what exams you take. So if you take all of them, it's costly for sure.
Okay, Tassie, I've spotted that as well about exam times. We'll pick that up again tomorrow too. Brilliant. Unless anybody has anything else massively pressing, I can hear the fireworks going on. I think perhaps it's time to stick our heads out the window and enjoy Guy Fawkes Night remotely. But thank you all for coming. Thank you, Alice, for giving up your time tonight. That's really kind of you. And we will see you all at the next one, which I can't remember the exact date, but is definitely the end of November, and will be all about how to practice.
All helping on practice and having some teachers to talk about their practice techniques. So that'll be really great. Okay, thank you so much everyone for coming, and we will get this on the website for you to have a look at. And yes, do let us know if you've got any other questions. Please always talk to us. We're more than happy to help. That's why we do our job. So thank you very much.